So yeah, welcome, and it's great to see all of you here and have a rainbow. I mean, hey, I thought I'd take you on a 25-year journey to this journey that led me to create life-size portrait photos of whales. And one of the things about my work is that from the very beginning, I never wanted to photograph whales and dolphins commercially. What I was really interested in is it possible to make a photograph of a whale that would touch someone who's had no reason to be moved by whales or their plight? What does that look like? I mean, because I've seen all the photography out there, I've seen what I've created, and I know in my heart that it could be more powerful than that. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And so I'll take you on that journey. So this is like, now I should mention the monitor has like a limited tonal color range, so these photos look very kind of saturated and pixely. So just know that's not the actual photography. But early on I started above water, photographing whales and dolphins. I kept everything going to my art. I lived very simply. This is where I lived 20 years ago. I had my boat. We had a team of volunteers. You know, we would go out on the bay, cover up to 80 miles a day. We'd go down to Pass Point Lobos, up to Davenport, using medium format camera and really going out during the most evocative sea states, atmospheric states, and really working to align that with whale behavior. Now, if those elements seem familiar to you, it's, you know, my hero Bob Talbot, whose work is just right around the corner, which I love seeing, really just inspired me to explore this direction with those elements. But after 5 years, I had nothing. I hadn't captured anything, and I was really starting to get demoralized, because when you emotionally, like when you set the intention to decouple from money, like, you know, you're putting a lot of money into it, but that's not your goal. Like, you want to really create something that's going to move people. Over time, like, if it can't sustain itself, it does wear you down. And I was really starting to get wore down and losing hope after 5 years. And just by chance, I've been doing all my photography above water. And in 2004, a friend of mine, you know, who I shared about my, you know, me feeling burned out and kind of like demoralized, and she said, you should go to Tonga and swim with humpbacks. And I've swum with whales before, but I never felt inspired by the photography that I created and that I've seen from others. And it's often like this. This is mine. It's just, you know, wide angle lens, whales in it, you know, fills up the whole frame. And it's very familiar. And I find that we can become numb to things that are familiar. And it's easy to just tune out. So you're never going to really reach a wider audience, you know. And really for me, the goal is, I don't think we're curious enough. I don't think collectively around the world, I just don't think, we haven't had any reason to feel a deeper connection to whales, to feel moved by them, to want to protect them. And so I just wanted to do my small part to contribute to that, to inspiring us to be more creative, or curious, excuse me. So I was wrapping up my time in Tonga, and I had another week to go, but the night before I took this picture, I decided to quit, and I just thought it was too much. It was, you know, 5 years, I have nothing, and I'm just going down this rabbit hole financially, and I thought it's just too hard. I just don't have it in me anymore. And I remember going out the next day, and I saw these two whales, and they would forever change my life, and they would send a shockwave that is with me now, 20 years later. And it started with the little one. He came right up to me. I'm using a fisheye lens at the time. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, that's what we use, and that's what you're supposed to use. He's like from here to the wall. I mean, he's really close. He's I don't know, 5 feet away from my camera. So he was so close I had to lower my camera, and this fluke went right by my face by a few inches. You know, that's a 5-week-old calf who already has that level of awareness not to bring us accidental harm. It's really remarkable. But I'd never been that close to a whale before, and that was the aha moment. It was like, oh my God, you could see everything. You see the parasites, you see their skin and musculature move and flex over their frame. You see, they just become real, and those are the elements you need to make them real in photography. And This happened, whale swam off, and a second later I just felt a single tap on my shoulder, and I knew it was too solid to be human, and I felt this dread as I turned to look, and it was Mom. And she extended her 15-foot, 2-ton pectoral fin, and she just grazed me with the tip. And, if she had touched me with the leading edge, she probably would have broke my back. And so just that level of care really, really humbled me. But not only that, turning to look to meet her eye at 10 feet away, roughly. I'd never been that close to a whale's eye underwater, and she's studying me. And in that instant, I saw clearly what I could create, what I could offer the world, is this idea of these life-size photographic portraits of them captured on their terms and very intimate distances. And the on their terms part is important for a lot of reasons, but a big one is it's reflected in their eye. If I swim up to them, if I swim after them, her eye's kind of wide there. She was concerned, so it's going to be wider, but you want that heavy-lidded, calm, meditative gaze, studying you, looking into you. And so that's how it began. And I had this crazy idea. I was like, well, how do you, there's making a portrait of the eye and the surrounding head, but how do you do the whole body? and I had this idea of just turning the camera on its side when a whale approaches really close, and then take a series of photos along their body. And, the inspiration was so powerful that, at first I tried to ignore it because I knew it would be a monumental task to do something like this. And I tried to ignore it for about 18 months. And to be honest with you, the depression and anxiety got so bad that, I had to get help. And my therapist at the time said she didn't know how to help me, and so we sat there in silence, and it hit me, and just the light bulb went off. I said, I just have to quit my job, sell everything I own, and hurl myself at this full time. And it was just like this tremendous weight was lifted. And I did just that. And I had enough funding for 5 months of field work across 2 field seasons. And this was my boat. She's, this is in a remote region of Tonga in the Hapai Islands. This boat sank several times, but it's a bargain, and and it really saved the day. And so, away we started, and I would have whales swim by very close. This whale's too far, probably 18 feet away, way too far. Because when you blow it up, there's just nothing with the eye. It's just nothing there. But I'm just learning. This has never been done before, so it was just like I didn't have any mentors, anyone I could talk to, and so I just really had to go out there and figure it out. The whale on the right became my next subject. This whale, I should go back. So the whale on the right, after I took that photo, it went away, did a 180 and came right back at me, and it was probably 5 feet away. The pec fin down here on the bottom quarter was going underneath my body. The swell actually adjusted to go under. And the thing that was interesting about this, what I learned is she's in shadow, so there was no detail for her eye. And so what I've learned is when you're with a whale and they're swimming around you, always keep the sun behind your head. And because you want their eye illuminated. And sometimes they just come up and look at my feet. And it's like you have to be disciplined. You can just peek, but you just kind of wait. And over time, our eyes occasionally will gravitate to each other, and we study each other. And, I mentioned I had enough funding for 5 months. This photo was taken towards the end of the second season. And it was kind of the same thing. I was like, oh my God, the season's almost over. I'm about to head back to the States with nothing other than this idea, this inspiration that's been with me. And I had another night. I was up all night, filled with anxiety, couldn't sleep. And it was just a mess, to be honest. And I went and got in the water with this mom and her calf and spent some time with them. The mom was sleeping at 60 feet, and the calf would try to wake her up. And calf can only hold their breath for 4 minutes, so they come up a lot. And as I was taking this photo, I noticed her eye was wide, and I was like, well, that's weird. Why is her eye wide? And then I felt this pressure on my back and on the back of my head, and I looked up and I saw a chin. And then I looked down and a pec fin went around my body, and this young 5-week, 6-week-old calf just kind of put me in an embrace, and we breathed together at the surface. And those are the only 2 times that's ever happened, and that's always, it's a coincidence, I'm sure, but it's whenever I'm at my lowest, when I'm out in the field, that they've intervened like this. It may be a coincidence, I'm sure it's a coincidence, but it gives me pause. Yeah. Now, these 2 wells are really special to me. This well, the calf, he became my first life-size portrait. And they both of them circled me for about 40 minutes. I made a lot of mistakes and miscalculations. I had the wrong lens. Now I know when you make life-size portraits of whales, you need a portrait lens, like an 80 millimeter, real telephoto. And I had like a wide angle still, which is safer, but you don't really get it. So this whale came up to me 3 feet away, so close that I stood up, and he went right by me like this far away, so I could get everything in vivid detail to make that first portrait. And he was so close that he grazed his pec fin on my thigh and just spun me around. I was gonna make a composite of his whole body, but because I was vertical, his pec fin just grazed me gently, and he just spun me around. So I couldn't finish. And so I was very grateful for that one life-size portrait, because I finally, the idea, the inspiration could live as a photo, so others could kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. And it would be, it'd be another 2 years before I went back out in the field. And during that time, I thought a lot about the mother of that calf you just saw, and how this photo was taken probably from 10 feet away, and she's too far away to make a life-size portrait. And so I would have sleepless nights thinking about this, like, I'm not going to swim up to them, so I got to wait for them to come that close, and I want that to happen. Because when they come up to you that close, their pectoral fin goes under your body, and you've got to stay flat. You're on snorkel, and you cannot move. They line you up with their eye, and when their tail gets to you, they still know how to line you up and move the tail around you. And you have to be very predictable, very stable, don't move. And so during this 2-year period, I did a show at the International Whaling Commission meeting in Santiago, Chile. And I met a very special person, Peter Hall, and this is us at his home in London, and he was so moved by my work that he's a patron of the artists, and he wanted to see my work continue. And so we talked at length about what that looked like, and it was really simple. It was like I was using entry-level DSLR cameras, but ultimately I wanted to use a medium format camera. And so I proposed using the very first 50 megapixel medium format camera that Hasselblad released in 2008. And so you take a camera like that, and you wait for a whale to come up to you 2 meters or 5 or 6 feet away, and you take a portrait of the eye. And it's never been done before, so I was really curious, what would that even look like as a photo? And the bigger question is, could it be something that would reach a wider audience? And the thing Peter and I talked about at length was, let's show these portraits in countries that hunt whales, and starting with Norway and then Japan. And if this is something that can move audiences there, that it has the potential to speak to a wider audience on the far more serious issues impacting whales and dolphins. Whaling accounts for about 1%. The big one is entanglement and fishing gear, ship strikes mentioned earlier today. There's a lot of things that our lifestyle does to impact them. So it's something that we're all responsible for. So that was that genesis. And so off I went. I resumed fieldwork in 2009 on the island of Dominica, and I spent 5 weeks there in search of one family known as the Group of Seven. There are about 25 sperm whale families that circumnavigate these islands around Dominica. And in the Group of Seven, there was one whale. Some of you have probably heard of him. His name is Scar. And at the time, he was 11 years old. He was a very curious male sperm whale who was, in my opinion, a close friend with one of the local operators named Andrew. And I thought, if I could find Scar, I could make, definitely I can make a higher res portrait and possibly do his whole body. And so away I went. And, the thing to remember, I'll show you, this is kind of like what it's like. You're just floating by yourself. You do this for like 5 weeks, and you're lucky if you get one day where this happens. And you just remain motionless. You let them set the terms of the encounter. And, when you do that, when you give them complete control and give them complete freedom to explore their own natural curiosity, you don't take it away from them. They can stay with you. They've stayed with me for up to 8 hours. So this was another whale. During my search for the group of 7, I met this whale. And in this photo, she was echolocating on me, and I could feel her clicks on my body. And she came up alongside, opened her mouth, and spat out like a squid tentacle at me. And I regret not taking it, because it's a phenomenon I've heard of where dolphins, I've never heard about it with sperm whales, but like orcas and dolphins will bring fish to divers. But she came alongside, she was like 10 feet away, so I thought, okay, let's see what this 50 megapixel camera can do. And I looked at it that night, and I was like, wow, 10 feet is too far away. And so the next day, with only like a week left, I had, I was run out of money. I had to go soon. We found the group of 7. And so I went from this to this. And I wish you could see it better with a better color tonal range. But you get the idea. Yeah. And this is kind of like the larger portrait. Wow. So what had happened is this whale, his name is Enigma, and he was a couple years old. His mom swam right by me. She did a dive, and she went to hunt about 1,000 feet down for diamondback squid. And Enigma and his cousin and aunt stayed at the surface, and Enigma just kind of came over and stayed with me. And we started the portrait session. I also made photographs along his entire body, and was able to make my first full-body life-size portrait. This is 5 by 20 feet. And even when I went to leave, it was about a half hour of photography with Enigma, and I thought, I have everything. I can go back. I went back to the boat, and he followed me. So I just stayed with him till his mom came back, and then I went back to the boat. But his mom came back, I went back to the boat, and Enigma's cousin showed up. This is Scar. And I was on the boat, and I looked over the stern, and he was right under the stern, upside down, cruising. And he's a much bigger being. And I was intimidated, but I got in. And, I'm intimidated because he's curious. He's not really afraid of people. And he's very curious. And this is how curious he gets. So I don't know if you can see my head right there. So you have to kind of wait for him to settle down, because it's almost, I've worked with him across years, and it's like there's like this initial greeting, like he wants to push up against you. When underwater, this is what I'm seeing. And he'll push up against me, and I have to push away from him. He wants to feel my fins at times with his mouth. And so I keep my fins behind me, and I'm always facing him, and just kind of waiting for him to settle. And he did. And this is one of my life-size portraits. It's 6 by 10 feet. And get a little bit more detail there. This is when I reunited with him after 2 years. And it was the same thing. I had a film crew with me. They were wanting to do an IMAX film about whales and my work and making life-size portraits, and they were with me for like 4 weeks, and they ran out of money, had to leave, so I stayed. And after they left, I found Scar, and he gave me a 4-minute sitting for my largest life-size photograph of a whale. This is what it looks like. It's 8 by 36 feet, and it's never been printed yet. It's going to be finished to the highest archival standard possible so that it can last for centuries. Yeah.
Amazing.
And, I want to inspire people alive today and inspire curiosity and empathy and the desire to do more to protect them. But also I want an archive of what we may lose in our lifetime. I want a profound reminder of what we allowed to slip through our fingers, our grasp, which I hope will not happen.
Ryan, how did Scar get his scars?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. The scars are from squid. So they're squid that are fighting for their lives as he's swallowing them whole. So yeah, they'll fight and they'll scratch him.
How big are the squid?
That's a good question. I think they're like 6 feet. The diamondback squid. I'm not sure 100%. Yeah, but they have a parrot beak, and so that you can see that's a great question. Perfect timing. This is a close-up of that life-size portrait that was released as a separate print. But yeah, you can really see the scarring.
His eye is so expressive.
Yeah. That's the thing. When they're looking at you like that, you're not alone in the universe. We're not alone, and that's what just lights a fire under me. It's like I need to connect them with more of us because we're not alone. They're at the mercy of how we choose to live as a society, and they're really counting on us.
Yeah.
And then in preparation for the shows in Norway and Japan, I had the opportunity to work with the most heavily hunted whale, which is the minke whale, and in particular the dwarf minke whale of Australia on the Great Barrier Reef. And so I spent 5 weeks out there chartering different boats, doing everything last minute, and we got last minute funding, so I cobbled together all these boats. This is one of my first attempts at a composite photo. I took 5 photographs of this whale. You can see hairs coming out of the blowhole, around the blowhole. These are scars from most likely a killer whale. And this photo is 5 by 12 feet.
How big are the minke whales?
I think they're roughly like 25 feet. The dwarf minke whale. Yeah, they're 28 feet. They're not as big. And so one of the boats I chartered, they had I worked with a great guy named John Rumney, who's one of the founders of the swim program with dwarf minke whales in Australia. So he helped me with all of this. He was amazing. He passed away a couple of years ago. But he got me a charter for a liveaboard for 5 days, and they had nothing to do. So their strategy was, let's take this guy. We'll go 7 miles offshore. And to save money, they dropped anchor and didn't go anywhere, right? And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And what ended up happening is by staying there for 5 days in a row, we kept having whales. I would wake up in the morning, look out the porthole, and there would be a dorsal fin going by. And then I would, quickly finish breakfast and be in the water with 15 dwarf minke whales every day. And this whale, her name is Ella, and she was first discovered in 2006 and named Ella by the biologist who discovered her. Because she has 2 L-shaped marks on her next to her eye. So it just gives you an idea of detail. She would approach so close, and this. I wish I had a little bit better rendering for you, but right here on the upper left is my shadow. So this was on day 5 of that charter, and I was being transferred to my other charter, and she was swimming around the stern, so I got her real quick, took this picture, and the captain said, I got to go. So they put me in the dinghy. We motored to the other boat. She followed me. I dumped my gear onto the deck and just immediately got back in the water with her. And I think I have the photo I took. That's a little bit more detail. But you can see I got back in the water and I took that photo. And this was my second largest photo I made. It's 6 by 30 feet. It's made up of over 30 photographs. It took 4 months to complete. I had to build a special computer just for this workflow. it takes 20 minutes to save. So I work on it for a half hour, and then I press save, take a break. It's a long process. And you can see all the details. These are all the skin flakes, the hair, the fine scratches, all these things that make them real in photography.
That is not reflection from the surface.
Oh, there is light dappling? Yeah, there's the light dappling through the surface of the water. Yeah, oh, definitely. And I mean, cloudy days are nice too, because that goes away, but also I like it. And so I completed this body of work. All in all, it was 12 years of full-time effort to create 14 life-size portraits. And they debuted in Norway, and the last one was in Japan. And I was, to be honest with you, I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I was partnering with the World Society for the Protection of Animals, and for them it's a very adversarial experience. It's very polarizing, very antagonistic with journalists, and it's very divisive. And I didn't want to do that, and I really just wanted to share it in a non-polarizing way. No finger wagging, no finger pointing, just here's the work. And I'll share the stories about whales that I know as individuals. And, they wanted people, I think the thing that really surprised me was the reaction, especially from journalists. We never talked about we never had a debate about whaling. All they could talk about was how I could be that close to a whale and not get hurt. And I can not only share my approach to that, but also I could talk about these whales as individuals and whales that I've come to know, some over years, and have a completely different conversation. And it was just really, let me see here. Yeah, it was really an incredibly heartwarming experience. There we go. These are some of the photos from Japan. My takeaway is that, with sufficient time and care, with an approach like this, that positive change is possible. And this was at the Tamada Museum in Tokyo, and the owner of the museum couldn't believe the turnout. We were getting up to 800 people a day. It's not a very big venue, and they just couldn't believe it. And it was just amazing, positive experience. And there's Ella. And then my last show was in Australia, at the Sydney, the Australian National Maritime Museum in Sydney. They have a gallery dedicated to U.S. artists, so I had the honor of showing my work there. And that was my last major show of the work. And I had worked so hard to get this work out in the world. I put another year in, and I wasn't making progress, and it was really starting to take a toll on me. So I took a break in 2015. My father passed away, and I had a close call of my own, and I just thought, I need to create again. And the thing with whales is that you could spend years of fundraising, years at sea with whales, and you could add up the time, like the real time where you're actually pressing the shutter. It's only a couple of hours in 14 years. And so I wanted to find a way to create every day for a while. And so I did something goofy. I started doing telescope photography with the sun and moon. That's me in Yosemite when I first started. This was taken at Moss Landing. This is a whale, a humpback whale blow down there with the sun. It's something that I've always wanted to create since I was a kid, so I finally committed to that. What's beautiful about that, I love that it's at Mbari, so I just set up at Mbari every time. But I spent a lot of time photographing trees. Let's see. Just focusing on the trees and sun. That's cathedral spires in Yosemite. That's the sun in a wavelength of light called hydrogen alpha. I worked in deep infrared. But really, what it did is it radically changed the way I connect with light and shadow, and it changed the way I work with whales. I'll still always explore life-size portrait photography, but part of the life-size, it can be, you got to be careful what you wish for, because it's a huge responsibility, it's a big financial burden, and it's very difficult to get venues that can hold pieces that big. And it's very expensive to manage that collection. And so the more recent work has allowed me to create smaller photographs, but also share whales in a different way, in a different light. So these are some of the other photos that were inspired by this work. So yeah, it's been very encouraging to. I never thought I could find inspiration again with whales. I thought, well, life-size portraits, that's I got to keep pursuing that. But to be able to explore new directions with light and shadow and water. And all of this work was released in my second book, Sun, Water, Being, published by the Dots Museum of Art. It's been a great experience working with the Dots Museum. They're one of the few art museums that, nature is often overlooked in the art world. It's subordinate to the human condition. And it's kind of, it's like it's beneath us, so you don't really see it in the art world much. So they've been great, and they curate work that communicates humans and nature as one. So I've been very honored to be a part of that. And the Dots Museum also sold a couple of my pieces to a law firm in Seoul, Korea. I had one of my 15 photographs of a minke whale is in this conference room at this law firm, and a television series writer was visiting the law firm trying to come up with ideas for a law show. And that photograph inspired this Netflix series. I don't know if you are familiar with Extraordinary Attorney Wu. So I was honored that my work inspired this TV show. And I love this show. I binged it in a weekend. And there's been so much renewed interest in whales in Korea, and the Dots Museum has been getting lots of news coverage and lots of inquiries about whales, and it's leading to bringing my work back out to light. My collection has been in storage for 8 years and has not seen daylight. But I've still been doing shows with smaller works. It's just been challenging to find venues that can have a budget to handle a collection this size.
Is that a climate control?
It's in climate control, yeah. And I call them like every week during the storms, is it leaking? Is it flooding? But the good news is this work, many of these pieces are going to see daylight. We're shipping them out next week. They're on their way to Korea. And I'm really excited. And it means the world to me. And, I don't know how we're doing on time. Oh, I guess we're good. Okay. But, those are the highlights. And, one of the things, too, is my mom, she gets a lot of credit for this. And I had to make that difficult decision I mentioned, when I was with my therapist. I didn't have a place to land, and she gave me a guest room to live in. And I lived with her for a couple of years while I figured all of this out. And, that's what I would say to any parent out there. It was scary for her because, what I'm doing doesn't have, financially measurable results. It's a total roll of the dice. But it's really important for the world, I feel. And I think it's a really important thing to do. And so that's what I would say to any parent. If you have a child who's maybe not rational, but has this vision to do something really important, for something like whales, or it could be anything, I would say to support them. And and that concludes my talk, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Oh, yes.
I have two questions. One's a really random one, but I'm just curious. When I see these photos of the whales, it seems like the eye is a lot smaller than you would expect for an animal of that size.
Okay, yeah.
How big is the eye?
Right, yeah, the question is how big are the whale eye? It depends on the species, so I'm guessing, actually, I would look up the size in literature, and then I would scale it in Photoshop that way, but I'm guessing, off the top of my head, a humpback is kind of like an orange. Maybe.
Small.
Yeah, blue whale could be like a grapefruit, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
And then that's right, Bryant, because we had that juvenile blue whale, and that's the first that you should not have birds would have taken it.
Yeah.
And the blue whale eye was about that big.
So like a really big grapefruit. Yeah. Yeah.
My second question is, have you ever thought to showcase your work with, like, using VR so that someone could walk along and
We-
like almost feel like they're next to the whale?
Yeah, that's on the list. Yeah, for sure. That's on the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions? Oh, yes, sir.
Have you swam with whales in Hawaii, and if so, do you recommend it?
Oh, you know, we can only swim with whales in Hawaii or anywhere else in the U.S. under a scientific permit. So I would say probably not a good idea. Just, you don't want to get fined. It's like $10,000, I think. But it's really crazy. I love your question because whales in the United States were the last whaling station closed in 1972 where they hunted whales for dog food. They'd make them into dog food. And it closed down, I believe, in 72 in Richmond, California. And we enacted the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which meant that I couldn't even apply for a permit to photograph whales unless it was for science. So they got total protection. Not only that, they got completely cut off from us. Like documentary filmmakers, I mean, they found ways around it, but you know, it put up a lot of roadblocks for us, yeah. Oh, yes.
Do you exhibit your work around here? And the second question is, what's next for you? Are you going to continue doing what you're doing?
Thank you. That's a great question. The question is, am I exhibiting my work locally, and am I going to continue? I just had a show in Pacific Grove, a group show with a wonderful group of underwater photographers, all working in black and white film. They're amazing. I don't have anything planned yet, but I'm always looking for opportunities to show locally. And I will continue photography, but I'm changing hats. I'm going to make my first film. And you know, it's the same intention, like create a film that can move people who have no interest in whales and dolphins, who've never had a reason to be moved by them. And so I'm going in that direction because with the photography, at best I could reach maybe a couple 100,000 people at best. You know, but if you can make a really compelling film, you can reach millions. You know, you can reach a lot of iPads. You know, you know. So that's my next goal. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate seeing y'all come out.